how do you deal with the environment as a competing priority in a set of other priorities, particularly in countries that don't have the luxury of pursuing all their priorities with equal vigor?
There are always going to be competing priorities. I think that if we continue to isolate environmental issues as being out there and separate and distinct from the economic issues, separate and distinct from the social issues, then we're always going to have a challenge, and we're never going to be able to mainstream these issues to have the long-term beneficial impacts which are ideal and for which we must strive. In relation to making decisions on how you allocate your budgeting and your expenditure, you could look, for instance, let's say you have a number of buildings on a campus in a developing country. You look at one of the buildings and you say, okay, if I take X dollars to retrofit this year, to make the building green, that will result in a saving in water, electricity consumption, waste usage, etc. That will give me a yield of Z dollars. And that increased yield, I am then going to buy the additional textbooks that I want. The point that I'm making is every entity, every physical entity, every company, every individual has some sort of budget with which they operate. And if they look at investing in green technologies and in greening activities, if they make the investment in natural resources, ultimately the kinds of cost savings that they make can then be used for other kinds of activities and other kinds of investments.
About priority issues, we have the same problem in Japan. Even Japan is kind of developed countries. Always energy saving and those kind of investment, long-term thinking is a bit difficult for general public to understand, even in Japan. So as I am an economist, so I do those kind of calculation. I try to convince Japanese people that you better invest now and you will get a better kind of result in the mid and long term. But that kind of idea will not easy to be accepted even in Japan, so we have the same problem. About social justice, yes, the reason because I'm working on climate change negotiation, and every time we talk about climate change negotiation, we come up with the idea of equity. But the issue is what is the definition of equity, and of course it's very difficult. But without discussion on equity, we will not reach any agreement.
What do you mean when you say equity?
For example, I want to try to be specific.
Good.
Okay, then for example, the nuclear power plant issues, then equity is equity between our generation and next generation. And in terms of nuclear power plant, we have nuclear waste. Right. So it's good to put those kind of responsibility to future generation or not. That is very, very ethical, equitable kind of discussion between. And also the thing is, we don't have the people who debate because we don't talk with as a future generation.
You mean because they can't speak for themselves?
Yeah, so we have to decide.
If you see sustainable development, if you see environmental issues as a protection of our natural resource base so that future generations can also have access to a sustainable quality of life, then you can define equity in that way. How does this generation act? How do we consume? How do we produce? What standards do we put in place to ensure that we do not so pollute the earth? I mean, scientists now talk about living in the era of the Anthropocene and the capacity of the individual to so alter the environment that it is irreversible. Is that desirable? Or do we want to consume and produce in a way that leaves something for our children and grandchildren? And ultimately, I think that's how we have to see equity. All of us wherever we are in the world, whoever we are, of whatever ethnicity, we want to have a better future for our children. And the only way that can happen is if we protect the natural resource base, which generates the economic gains and the social benefits for all of us. And that's really what equity is about.
Max Planck, one of the grandfathers of quantum physics, said the way to get a new scientific principle accepted is to wait for the old scientists to die. So changing mindset is extremely difficult. It's easier to crystallize and support already held attitudes and beliefs than it is to change them. What's great about what we're talking about, young people in grade school and university, they're already there. They already have a sense. Our surveys show in many countries a strong sense of the urgency of environment, notwithstanding the fact that we're an urbanizing world, and there's an emerging syndrome called nature deficit syndrome, because kids grow up in urban centers and never see trees, you know. But nonetheless, the young people are already there, so our task is to aid and abet what's already there. And real social change, especially on an issue as important as environment, is really generational. So if we can support this current generation effectively, then the next generation will see change.
So we have to support them, and we also have to get out of their way, presumably.
Yes, yes.
What do we begin to take practical steps now that will work for us? You know, and what action point can I take away as an individual, as someone who's running a content-based platform? What can I do, and what should we do as a country as regards educating people about sustainability?
I think that the education relating to environment starts at kindergarten, not at university. And the approach to it should be an inquiry approach rather than a didactic approach. And it should be integrated in the sense that you don't isolate environment from other issues of economics and politics and social movement and poverty and peace and conflict and all other issues that relate to the subject. So it should be integrated, not isolated. It should be experiential as much as possible. In my country, there's not a single community in our country that doesn't have at least one environmental group or movement of some kind. So there's lots of opportunity for students to participate in society directly as part of what they do as students. If you do those three things, innovate ways of doing those three things, that leads to a fourth aspect, I think, important, which is stewardship. If we want them to be the leaders of tomorrow and to solve problems in ways that we haven't done well, we need to take an inquiry approach. And keeping in mind, our young people are learning informally, online, and social networking, and it's very important that we legitimize that as part of the learning process within our institutions.
So we've heard that in Senegal, they have mobilized pupils in schools as a kind of environmental inspectorate, where the pupils draw attention to problems in their areas, and the pupils report on what the problems are, and then the statement is that the pupils presumably follow with interest the response of the government. And that strikes me as a wonderful idea, but also a dangerous one, because if you give the students the idea that they are responsible for the environment and the government is going to respond to them, then the government had better respond to them. But it sounds like a really interesting innovation, so please keep us posted as to how this develops.
There are at least three things you need for social change. This is speaking in very broad, sweeping terms. You need public awareness. Some people have been talking about that. So you need to use the media, you need to use your educational institutions, you need to use everything at your disposal to create a level of awareness. The second is you need social or community or national or municipal level activity. You need groups of people at the community level to be active. And third, you need policy. You don't get policy unless you have awareness.